Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the BS Podcast Show.
I'm Blaze.
And I'm Shard. And today we'll give you a weekly dose of bullshit. We got a couple things to talk about here today, fellas. If you're, of course, tuning in live, please sure to bear with us for unofficial attitudes. If you're tuning on a later date, you can skip to any parts of the episode that you might find interesting. So, Blaze, you told me a while ago that you got a lot to talk about for today's episode. Why don't you get us started on a topic you have to bring in?
So today's topic is referring to the concept of Motte and Bailey's. This refers to a type of argumentative structure, a type of fallacy, if you would. Motte and Bailey's are not necessarily bad in terms of conveying an argument, but rather they are bad for the sake of deception. Now, a Motte and Bailey is when, by definition, for a particular topic or problem, someone tries to hold two similar positions, where one position of that issue, when argued for, is easier to defend, while the other, the first one being the Motte, which is the easier and simpler argument or position to argue for and defend, while the Bailey is the harder and more difficult to argue for or position to have in comparison to the Motte. Now, here's where before we continue, there must be some clarification on what a Motte and Bailey is versus a different type of fallacy. It's quite commonly confused as a contradiction or a type of hypocrisy. While it's not unheard of, nor is it unfounded upon when making that comparison, it's important to note that the difference between the Motte and Bailey with a contradiction or hypocrisy is that, at least with the hypocrisy, the individual knows that they're saying something opposite to what they actually believe. A contradiction, someone is saying something without intentionally realizing that they are backtracking or saying something opposite that they once held before. A Motte and Bailey, however, one, the person is fully aware of the arguments they're making, and two, typically, when done properly, you shift between those two positions when it's convenient, and typically with the intention of ideological brainwashing or agenda seeking. Now, the reason why this is a problem is because those who participate in this type of fallacy are knowingly manipulating or trying to easily convince those who are more susceptible, to be more willing to accept or be convinced by those type of arguments. A simple type of example I can give before we get into the larger topic, would be when I want everyone to live free, happy, and all this stuff. But at the same time, I also believe that everyone should be equal upon all factors with no differences. And this is the Motte and Bailey. The Motte is that everyone is free to do whatever they want, however they want, and whomever. However, the Bailey is that despite having that freedom, you want everyone to be the exact same position, as if you want to ignore human error or human influence or just different incentives and action. Now,
This doesn't sound like a contradiction, though. It sounds more like just like, at least the example you gave doesn't sound like a contradiction, because even when you have, like, you want everybody to live freely as they please, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't also wish for everybody to be equal standing amongst, X, Y, and Z. So I don't I don't see the
Okay, well,
I don't see a logic there.
well, okay, maybe now either okay, back, take a couple steps back here. Either A, the example is bad, or B, in that particular scenario, logically speaking, yeah, it doesn't seem to have an error. But here's a counterpoint to that. It's not supposed to show any visible errors straight out the gate. What makes Motte and Bailey's so dangerous in terms of going against it is that if you don't notice it, you realize that you're actually the Bailey is the harder argument to defend or argue for, not because it's a bad one, not because it's anything factually or morally wrong, because you have to actually confront it to make that distinction. It's the fact that when you make that argument, right, people rely on the Motte to be the Trojan horse for everyone to accept first, and then once everyone has gobbled up drunk the Kool-Aid and accepted this narrative, the Bailey comes in and it's a lot easier to confront rather than going straight for the Bailey itself. Another angle is that
You're describing a castle with a moat.
What?
You're describing a castle and its surrounding city.
Well, that's what a Motte and Bailey is referencing off of. The Motte being, or rather, not the Motte being like, not moat. It's not about the moat. It's Motte and Bailey, because the Motte is like the small settlement you see in like the lower half of a like small village or kingdom, or like a settlement of some kind, right? But the Bailey is like the strong fortress where like the barons, the nobles, to someone of high rank. It could be the castle. Don't get me wrong. That's still considered a Bailey in this description. But typically, that's what it's referencing off of. The Bailey being the harder but more secured area, and you can't easily confront it. Versus the Motte, which is easier to digest, easier to confront, and easier to handle. Now, when it comes to the argumentative structure and its fallacies, Motte and Bailey's are deceptive. Motte and Bailey's are intentionally misleading, not because they are wrong. Again, it's not about morals. It's not about facts. It's not about logic. It's about perception and optics. Motte and Bailey's are the Motte and Bailey is trying to do like a 1-2 punch combo where they tell you the first thing to lower your guard, then the next one comes in for you to be having no reason, or you already accepted the first terms. Now you kind of have to logically conclude that you reach the next one. And and the best example I can give would be which is the immigration crisis right now. Now, for those who are either disconnected from the news or haven't really been watching the news that much, or who do know this but want a refresher, ever since the end of the... What was it? What was going on?
None. Don't worry about it.
Anyway.
Continue.
Sorry. So
my dog is trying to get out, try to mess around, and we had to shoot. Like, I tried to get it back away.
So now, Chad, correct me if I'm wrong with some details in terms of the timeline of events, but since like the middle of the pandemic, more so since the start of the Biden administration in 2020, even and heck, some would argue, being charitable here, halfway through Trump's presidency, there was a large influx of migrants just drastically going into the West, especially immigrating to the West, more specifically the UK and Canada and United States. And this became more and more prevalent since the Biden administration, where Kamala Harris, being the border czar, basically running the show in the southern border.
She's no longer the border czar, apparently.
Well, no, not now because she's a candidate and she's this whatever. They're trying
She's
to
still
save face,
vice president, but she's still
I know,
but like
I know, but it,
no, I'm saying
again,
I'm saying it with sarcasm because like people be saying that oh she up there, people saying she was the border czar, people say she isn't. I mean, we know damn well she was. On the very first 2 years of Biden's running office, she was classified as the border czar, and only until recently, since Biden stepped down, did she no longer became the border czar. Just want to clarify that piece of information. Like she is still, she was and still is the border czar until she gets out of that. But continue.
But yeah, and we'll address that point later on. But with when the border crisis, so ever since the Biden administration and with Kamala Harris's open border approach in when it came to the border, the southern border, a large influx. And not just here in the United States, but even in the UK, where a lot of like left-leaning or Democratic politicians have become more and more lax with their border controls, and because of this, all throughout the Western countries, being United States, Canada, and the UK, as previously mentioned, a drastic number of undocumented migrants have been entering the country in large droves, one after another, for each preceding month. Now, what does that have to do with Motte and Bailey? What with our conversation on Motte and Bailey's today? Well, you typically now let's keep in mind, politicians, no matter their affiliation, will do this to some extent or another. However, you're more likely to see an argument of a Motte and Bailey argument. You're likely to see a Motte and Bailey type of argument or arguments from the left and Democrats than you would ever see it on the right. Not necessarily because they are above making such arguments, but rather because typically when they make arguments even close to that those parameters, they're a little more upfront with it in most cases than not. And if they try to do some deceptive tactics like that, knowing them, they are probably going to do something a little more effective, something that you can easily recognize in due time. However, this cannot be the same for the left. The left and Democrats in general, most typically the extreme left, not even extreme left, just most of the left, Democrats, and just and some libertarians for the last 30 years have been applying this ploy for a long, long time through a numerous amount of different political issues. So much so that if you really think back on it, a lot of things that we consider cultural or socially like just degenerate now, this was just it's rather just an expected product of 30 years worth of deception to this very day coming from the left. Even if the Republicans held office, this stuff didn't stop with Trump. This stuff didn't stop with was it Bill Clinton? Yeah, Bill Clinton was a Republican at the time.
Sure as hell didn't stop with Obama when he deported a lot of people.
Oh no! It like I say, it never stops no matter who's in office, but it gets worse when a Democrat's in office, because when they're in office, they have more power and they have more time to implement their agenda one way or the other. But again, one step at a time here. Now, with immigration, what would you think? Now, start with me here. What do you think is the Motte and Bailey with immigration? Like, what arguments do you think Democrats typically use that fits the description of a Motte and Bailey when it comes to immigration?
I guess, we want everybody in, but we don't want them in our home. In a sense?
Close. You're close, but it's just a bit of an itch there. So, the Motte... in this case, I actually, it would be easy if you told me which is the Motte, which is the Bailey, but I think I know what you mean by how you answer the question. So, yes, it's better if you explain it better, because I am not exactly
well knowledgeable on the subject, believe it or not.
I mean, that's fine, but you got quite close, to be honest. So the Motte in this case, when it comes to immigration, is the typical people should be allowed to enter and leave the country, of any country really, as they so choose. Not for the sake of it, but rather because no matter where you are, no matter where you're from, if you want to go to another country, it could be, you have a reason to do so, be it for being a refugee from on war-torn nations. You could be asylum seeking. You could be seeking opportunity just for a better life. You could be seeking just work to send back to your homeland. You could be seeking education, and the list goes on, right? And this makes sense why this is the Motte in this case, because it's easy. If you most people are compassionate. Most people are, they're self-serving at most cases, but they doesn't mean they lack the capacity to show an extra pair of hands or help others when needed. Heck, if a woman got mugged on the street or got her tail whooped by some random dude, you can bet there's like 5 guys nearby that will come in and rescue her. Which, that's put a pin on that for another day. But that doesn't necessarily mean that just because something sounds nice, right? And that's the thing. The Motte in this case, they always sound nice. They always sound agreeable, and they have to be, right? Because you're not gonna you're not gonna try to present your position in any particular topic in the worst way possible, right? You're not gonna do that, and thus the Motte in this case, you want people to have the opportunity to make the active choice of immigrating to another country or a more well-off country even, and as long as their reasons are, as long as they have a good reason for it, why not? Why hurt them? Why restrict them, right? This is where the Bailey comes in. Yes, now this is where the Bailey come in, and you don't recognize, and here's the thing, this is important to recognize this because if assuming you're not well read or you're not well informed about certain how certain systems work in countries, in small groups, whatever, both in the micro, meso, and macro scale, then it's really hard to recognize the Bailey until it's too late. And this is where the Bailey comes in when it comes to topics like immigration. The Bailey is that they want open border policy because the system that's currently in place is quote unquote too restrictive, or it takes too long to do anything. And therefore, instead of just having them go through the motion like anyone else, we should just let them in and just let them figure things out like everyone else would who's a native born citizen of that particular land. The reason why this is the Bailey, now first off, just by how it sounds, now to some extent that also sounds pretty reasonable, assuming you were ideologically bankrupt, because it sounds reasonable because just like the Motte position, it makes sense. It's consistent with the first side. It's consistent because you still want the people to go in and out as they please. You still want to acknowledge their reasons. But what makes it the Bailey is that it's the extent or the methodology that justifies the action. And the reason why the belief in open border policy is the Bailey in this case, not because they don't want it in your backyard, that's a whole other issue, but rather it's the Bailey because, one, no one's going to openly welcome, no one reasonable really, is going to openly be okay with just anybody coming into the country. Not only because of national security, you could bring up foreign affairs, terrorist groups, or whatever. You're also bringing in the risk of diseases, drug smuggling, because you never know who's carrying what unless you actually filter through them, which in that case, you just went back to square one of the immigration process. No one's going to allow no one's going to be happy with the influx of people taking up jobs and opportunities that a normal native-born citizen didn't get the chance to actually compete for. And not only that, but too much resources being spent on more people coming in. Now, before we continue, let's preface something for the audience here. It doesn't matter if you are a Democrat or a Republican or somewhere in between. No position is outwardly claiming or wishing for the complete eradication of immigration. Not only would that be logically impossible, since people have incentives, people have circumstances, and people ultimately have reasons to leave or go to another country. It doesn't matter. So it's not possible. Someone's going to try to go somewhere. Two, economically, it's unsound because with immigration, you can have, it also ties with trade. It also ties with foreign relations. Like, it's okay to have a fair number of people from this country show up so that we could have an incentive with a relationship of that country. And it's also, lastly, is also not good economically because with immigration comes workers, with workers comes finance and greater GDP and overall capital. So therefore, it doesn't matter what economic system you're running, whether it be communist or not, you don't want to stop immigration because as long as your GDP and your capital is being increased with increase of workers and production, you don't want to just stop people from coming into the country, especially not right now, since in the United States, the replacement population is drastically smaller than it ever was for the last 50 years. But again, we'll just put a pin on that for now. With immigration, you don't, like I said, no political position wants to stop immigration all entirely. No one is arguing that. It'd be foolish to do so. It's counterproductive, and is that. The reason why I preface this because the very same people who would make these type of arguments are people from the left, the people who are making the Motte and Baileys. These Motte and Baileys are very, very dangerous. Not because of what they are in and of itself, but rather because of people who are not philosophically literate, or let alone have an IQ above room temperature, maybe even above that. They don't recognize it. They don't recognize these ploys. They don't recognize these deceptions. They don't recognize these tools or these type of rhetoric that is used to manipulate those who don't know any better. And I say that with no smile to my face because most people don't know what the heck they're talking about when they discuss certain things. Heck, welcome to the show. This is the BS podcast. We're two idiots just talking stuff and just to talk about what we believe. But this point still stands. I can say that I know where I do and do not lie. Star can definitely say that too. But most people won't do that. Most people think they know what they're talking about when they talk about politics, philosophy, social issues, but they ultimately ignore the consequence of what happens when you fulfill certain ideas. And this is what Motte and Baileys comes in. Motte and Baileys, all they do is just masquerade the consequence and trying to promote more ideas rather than actually confronting the idea themselves to their logical conclusion. Let me ask you this, both in chat and in and with you, Shard, what do you think is the consequence if we reach the Bailey stage and we just have open borders? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, considering that question can already be answered with today's situation, such as the rampant crime and chaos that's Great Britain is currently going around. We currently have overpopulation in quote unquote sanctuary cities in places like Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. Let's not even get to the matter of the fact that in terms of in terms of resources being spent, more money, taxpayer dollars, and by extension, just money in general, is being spent on illegal migrants that have no business being in America, at least not in a legal sense. To where, like, you say you go to New York, there's like a situation where migrants can get like prepaid credit cards, things just to get things like they have access to certain homes. And if you're in the South, if you live in the South, in certain parts of the country, there'll be a case where they will basically encourage, I won't say enforce, but they will basically quote unquote politely advise you to take in a migrant home and to let them serve as like a free worker or something like that, which is another way of saying slavery. Let's be frank.
No, it's not really slavery if you're voluntarily doing work.
Motherfucker, you hear the language that's being used by some of these people who are saying this, you can tell that is just...
Oh no, I don't deny the rhetoric being used when it comes to that. I'm just saying that it's not slavery if you're voluntarily
maybe so
doing the work.
Should a voluntary part? Sure, but let's argue semantics. At the end of the day, the rhetoric, if we're focusing on the rhetoric, not the semantics of the actual. So, like, obviously, it's not full on slavery because the migrant can easily leave or the person can just fire them, and they're not being abused on that, at least not to my knowledge. But like, when you have a rhetoric that basically is just a watered down, less and more swallowable pill version of slavery, then that's where I think you cross the line. And of course, that all would never happen if our borders were be stricter. Sure, you might have those cases where people might say something similar, but what are the chances that that's going to fly under the radar with American U.S. citizens doing it with U.S. citizens? That's not going to fly under the radar too easily. But this whole open border issue, we have a situation where like that could fly on the radar because they're trying to use it as a way to solve the homeless nature of migrants because they got nowhere to go, nowhere to get a job, nowhere to work, and all stuff. And what's the consequence? Taxpayer dollars that we spend get sent to people, which I find ironic because we're giving all these resources to them. But you couldn't spare the same amount of resources to people who live in this country, who was born in this country, who's also struggling in the same vein. You couldn't spend the same resources to them as you would to people who are coming here illegally. That's why I think we have a bit of a problem. And of course, they're gonna be fucking hypocrites too because they're gonna say all that, and damn well their inner circle that doesn't consist of any of the people that they're trying to bring into the country. So,
and that's like I said, that last one we'll just put a pin in that because I think it'll tie into a point we'll make later. But so Motte and Bailey, as you can see, like a Motte and Bailey is not necessarily the argument itself, but rather how it's conveyed. Now, how do you recognize? Now, before how you can recognize it, let's give it an example of a Motte and Bailey. Now, or just casually in your day-to-day life, is that the conversation of transgenderism has been, one, just seemingly getting worse and worse as time goes on ever since 2016. I say 26, I know it's been, now, for a chat here, I know that the trans ideologues and their arguments has been around longer than 2016. It's the fact that they gain a whole lot more traction and coverage not then than they did 20 plus years ago. Now, unless I'm wrong there, to some extent, feel free to post in the comments, or if you're watching live, post in the chat and we'll acknowledge it. But at least for me, when I got into politics in 2016, after turning 14 years old, when I noticed, it was very prevalent that there was a active push for trans ideologues and trans acceptance in such an accelerated state that, quite frankly, any other social movement in the last 100 years pales in comparison, in my opinion. And with the topic of today being Motte and Bailey's, the Motte in this case with trans ideologues, actually, with everything we covered so far, Shard, what do you think is the Motte in the trans ideology in terms of arguments?
I can't say no for sure. I can't say, honestly.
Take a guess. Like, with everything what do you think is the easiest they try to argue for that seemingly doesn't have an inherent downside into partaking?
I honestly, I don't know, and I feel like that type of subject should be saved for a later day. Honestly, but if I had to give it a straight answer, I might have something to do with equal standing. Like if you're a trans woman, you're equal to a woman or something like that.
Actually, no. The Motte in this case would be, and mind you, this is no jab at you. It's this conversation, this type of topic has been around for a little too long, I'm afraid, and it's gotten out of hand. So it's hard to know when it began and when it will end. But the Motte in this case is the general argument being that, I don't feel comfortable in my skin. I believe transitioning or going through these procedures to alter my body in some way, shape, or form will help me feel happy with myself. And this is what I truly am, and this is how I want to live my life. It's basically the born that way argument for the LGB back in like the 80s and 90s, just altered for the sake of trans ideology. However, the Bailey and by the way, the Bailey is a lot more complicated, not because it's hard to define, but rather because there's so many examples of this that it's hard to pick which one. But for the sake of more recent news, to make it easier to conceptualize, the Bailey is that those who transition are just as qualified for the label of whatever they transition to as those who are already placed in that label. Be it, for example, a trans woman is exactly the same as a regular biological woman. That's the simplest answer I can give. That more relates to more recent events. What's going on with that UFC Olympics fighter a while back. Turns out she wasn't trans, or she isn't. She just has a decent amount of testosterone. But even if she wasn't, even now, not to go into bad faith here. Yes, she wasn't trans in any way, but it doesn't change the fact that is an example of a long time conversation that's been going around for the last 5 years, at least as far as I can remember. But back on the subject, however, trans ideology utilized Motte and Bailey tactics very, very frequently. And much like the alphabet mafia back in the 90s and 80s, back in the 80s, 90s, and I think the 70s, I don't know. I think the 70s was like post-civil rights movement, so it's not a lot of time to breathe for a new movement. But let's just say the hippie movement of the Vietnam days and going forward. The trans ideology, much like the LGB, they have pushed this narrative where, hey, we want to live our life how we see fit without imposing on anybody. And that's the Motte. That's the only Motte position they can have, because it's the only thing they really need. Oh, I live my life different from the norm, but yet I don't actually impose myself. I don't cause no trouble for other people. Great. That should be more of a reason for you to not F with me and give me my space and let me live my life how I see fit. And you know what? If the conversation stopped there, we wouldn't be bringing them up to this type of conflict 50 years later. The issue, however, is that many different examples of Baileys show up, especially from 2016 until now, where the trans ideology and trans acceptance had pushed beyond mere acceptance and tolerance and became now you either do this or you are the enemy. No ifs, ands, or buts. And the biggest example I can give from like the last several years was when everyday ordinary men like you and I, Shard, that don't want to have any romantic, physical, or even sexual relationships with trans women. I don't want that. I know you don't want that. But yet, and we're straight, right? We're both straight as far as anyone's concerned. But yet, if for some reason, and these different branches of these Baileys tie into one another, like one can overlap the other, they both happen at the exact same time, doesn't matter. But we could be minding our own business, seeing a person who we thought is a biological woman, who we thought doesn't have any, who never gone through transition, and they were exactly how they were meant to be from when they were born. And yet when we find out that they were a biological man and we don't want to date them, somehow we're the problem. And that is why it's a Bailey. It's an argument you can't really promote because not only is it logically stupid or illogical as all avenues possible, but it's also a drastic contradiction based on the arguments of the born that way narrative that the LGB promoted back then, where people don't decide who they're attracted to, they just are. Is a contradiction there. Therefore, you can't make that argument in the same vein. But because they want to interchangeably go back to the Motte, it's harder to confront one half the position without confronting the other. Therefore, which only like galvanized their position of the all or nothing position even further, which makes things worse. Not just for me, not just for you, but anyone who has their brain still screwed on their heads. Now, this is why it's so important to recognize what it means to see to confront a Motte Bailey. These types of arguments don't actually push the conversation. All they do is galvanize or ideologically brainwash other people into following an agenda that, quite frankly, likely they don't even know what they're talking about, at least not to the logical conclusion that ends up looping right back around and realizing it was completely stupid and a giant contradiction. And because they go back and forth in these two positions of, hey, we want to be left alone, but hey, you have to do this and that for my convenience. They keep going in and back and forth when it's convenient. As soon as they get power, they go to the Bailey. As soon as they they have to go on the defensive, they go to the Motte. And it just it's like an around circle of just utter like confusion and nonsense. Now, with all that said, how do you go out your way to recognize a Motte Bailey? Well, for one, not everyone will. That's the unfortunate truth of the matter. Not everyone will recognize Motte Baileys for what it's worth, because depending on who you're talking to, be it like public speakers, members of certain groups or organizations that have a particular value or ideology they want to carry, or even politicians, right? Well, politics is a little bit easier because you have to go into their rhetoric knowing they're going to say something stupid. But when you for those who can, like most people just can't because they don't have the necessary capacity to think beyond themselves or think beyond for example, issue voter. Like they're never going to figure out.
Hey, be careful.
To recognize.
Hey, be mindful of your volume. You keep topping now on Discord.
Oh, sorry, but I think I burped when I kept talking out, so my voice went up. Like one issue, single issue voters voters, they will never recognize a Motte and Bailey. For like casual, like, hey, do whatever, just leave me alone, they will never recognize a Motte and Bailey. They care about their own convenience. Heck, freaking centrist or moderate people who try to stay in the middle of the political axis will never recognize a Motte and Bailey, because as long as you remain in the middle, you are still easily susceptible to manipulation tactics and brainwashing from those who don't have your best interest. But for everyone who do have that capacity, here's my advice. 1, stay up to date with all statistical analyses, data, and news cycles.
Got a message there?
No, it's fine. Make sure you pay close attention to statistical analyses, data, type of word choices these advocates be making. Keep a close eye on what exactly is being presented versus a different scenario of a similar problem. You have to recognize these things, and most importantly, connect the dots where they logically reach. If someone using the trans ideology, for example, if someone said they want to be left alone, they don't want to oppose nothing, yet they want to tell you that you have to respect their terms in some way, shape, or form. Form. I don't know what I misspoke there. You have to catch that. You have to pay attention to what they say in one hand and when they say another. Like I said, contradictions and hypocrisies are typically easy comparisons with Motte and Bailey's, but they don't typically. But the key point is that the person A knows what they're saying is a double-sided coin, and also they don't actually base their position on any moral, factual, or logical position. These are the core pillars and tenets that make up how to make up these Motte and Bailey. It's just although a lot of people are already a little more bankrupt than already is, and it's kind of sad. And now, when confronting it, I will say additional step you can take is catching it, but also point out the problem. If you ask someone if they believe X, Y, and Z, and they don't confront your question, but instead calls you an istophobe, stop talking to them. Know that everything they're going to say after that is other tripe and BS. If they do try to confront it, but still give further rhetoric, pay close attention. Don't worry, there will be more strategies and other types of arguments that we will cover on this channel as time goes on. And stuff, I will bring Motte and Bailey's up again as, further reference to whatever topic we have in the future. But typically, this is the first and most important thing people have to figure out, because if you don't recognize this, I'm afraid you're not going to recognize a good chunk of rhetoric being spun against people to the point where it's just a snowball and inevitable wait time of when is this going to burst its bubble and reach into chaos. Got any questions, Shard, for me before we close off?
Honestly, that's a lot to take in. I encourage many of those to take in. I mean, different from my own terms. I encourage a lot of those to definitely put some more research into this type of topic. It should be way more aware of this type of thing. I didn't know about this coming in, and I can't say I'm very knowledgeable now, but that what you describe opens a lot of doors for us, a lot of doors and avenues for us to look into for future episodes. And I do, thank you, Blaze, for bringing this to my attention as well as the attention of other viewers at home. But all in all, that seems to be it for today. So once again, thank you all for joining just for today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, want to tune in for more episodes, be sure to like this video, comment and subscribe, and share with your family or friends. Be sure to follow our socials as their links will be listed in the description below. And until next time,
I'm Blaze.
And I'm Sean. And this has been your weekly dose of... This has been your weekly dose of bullshit. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.